Hi, this is Bastiaan, and this is my annotation of a game I played against a Polish engine named Gosu. Strong engine rated 2500 plus. So I'm playing white. I start with d4, knight f6, and I play c4. So this is an easy way to enter the queen's gambit because uh, pawn to d5 hasn't been played. So there's no danger of black capturing the pawn, with white developing in order to recapture it. So I'm getting immediate control of the center. Black plays e6, knight to c3, and bishop to b4. Now, bishop to b4 is an ambitious move because after a3, black is basically forced to sacrifice his bishop pair. So the other options are retreating bishop to e7, which basically wastes moves for black. So that won't be played, or bishop to a5 will simply trap the bishop after b4, bishop b6, and pawn to c5. So after bishop to b4, black signals his willingness to trade off bishop for knight. So a3 was played. Bishop takes knight, check, and pawn takes bishop. So when we see this type of play, we can see that white is left with double pawns. However, in this case, it's not too bad because black has taken no control of the center. He'll have to do so eventually, and then black can undouble his pawns. So c5 is played. Now I can take on the free pawn, but then I'll be left with tripled isolated pawns. Seems like a bad move. I can just wait and let black take my pawn, and I can recapture and gain a strong pawn island. So I'm just going to leave the pressure. Now, again, if black was to play d5, I can simply capture the pawn and be left with undoubled pawns. So that's why d5 isn't played. But because d5 isn't played, there is less protection on e4, and I'm willing to develop in the center and play e4. However, I can't do it because this knight is still guarding e4, and I don't have a knight to protect the square, so I'm playing an old school move, simply f3, which is the Kmoch move in the Saemisch. And this move is designed to support the center, allowing e4. The drawback, of course, is there's no longer any protection on e3 except for the bishop. This will become important in a minute. Also, the diagonal of the king is now open. So there's a trade-off. I will be able to take control of the center, but I will be creating some weaknesses. And white has to be aware of those weaknesses. Black continues with d5, preventing an immediate e4, and this of course solves my problem with the double pawns. So simply pawn takes pawn, and black recaptures with the knight. And there are two reasons why black recaptures with the knight. The first one is to open up the diagonal for the queen. Second one is to attack the pawn on c3. Now, how to continue? Of course, we want to protect the pawn. Let's see how we can do it. If bishop to b2, protect, foreshadowing the bishop, black can simply play knight to e3, attacking the queen, attacking the bishop. There is no longer, as said before, any protection on e3 by the pawn. So bishop to b2 isn't accurate. White can try bishop d2, but this still protects e3, but it blocks protection on d4 by the queen. So now black can continue with this second attacking idea. Pawn takes pawn. I have to recapture with my own pawn because the queen is being blocked by the bishop. Pawn recaptures. And now black can take advantage of the open diagonal, queen to h4 check, winning a pawn. So white shouldn't develop the bishop in order to protect the pawn. Instead, white should simply get rid of this pawn first, because it will become under attack by the queen. So pawn takes pawn, gaining a pawn. And of course this opens up the d-file, and black cannot recapture with the knight, because if knight takes pawn, then we get queen takes queen check, king takes queen, forced, then bishop b2 will either get a free knight or a free pawn on g7 and the rook on h8. So taking the pawn opens up the file and prevents black from taking on c3. Black continues play with queen to a5, which does two things. It prevents an attack on the queen on d8. Also develops in order to have two attackers on c3, possibly even with a check, or an attacker on the queen with a discovered check. And in some cases the queen can take on either c5 or even a3, depending on how white develops. So nice developing move by black. And I play e4, attacking the knight, seemingly allowing black to take on the pawn on c3. Now, if knight takes pawn, which is a bad move, white can continue with queen to d2, pinning the knight. So the knight is under attack, and the knight cannot be used to capture the pawn on c3. What else can be played? If queen takes on pawn on c5, pawn takes knight, queen takes pawn check, bishop d2, queen e5 check, knight d2, and queen takes d5. White is down 2 pawns for a piece, and this is still winning for white, so that won't be played either. So after pawn to e4, black tries, queen takes pawn check. Now black has a clever idea to win a pawn. Now of course I have to respond to the check, but I'm still threatening an attack on the knight. So after bishop to d2, which is basically forced because there's an attack on the rook as well, I'm getting 2 attacks. But after the move queen to e5, this pawn is pinned because of the check, and it looks like black just gained the pawn for free. So now white needs to block the check. There are 3 pieces, well 4 pieces actually, able to do so, if you want to count bishop to e3, which will just get taken. Queen e2, which will allow pawn takes knight. Doesn't work because of queen takes rook check. So the only two playable moves are either bishop to e2, allowing pawn takes knight, because now there's no longer a check, and knight to e2. Between those moves, knight to e2 is the best. If bishop to e2 is played, black can play knight to f4, saving the knight, attacking the bishop and attacking the pawn on g2. And if bishop takes, queen takes, white is left with no advantage and is a pawn down. So this isn't the best way. However, knight to e2 protects f4, so now knight to f4 cannot be played. Frankly, knight to any other place cannot be played as well. Also, this knight allows for either bishop to c3 attacking the queen, or bishop to f4 attacking the queen, depending on where black flees with his knight. Of course, the knight has to flee because it's under attack for the moment. So let's say knight to c7, then we can play bishop to f4, attacking the queen and winning a knight. So if queen takes pawn, you get the in-between move, rook to c1, black will lose the knight. If instead black plays knight to e7, we develop the bishop to c3, attacking the queen and the pawn and the rook, again losing for black. So black plays seemingly the most logical move, knight to f6, because after bishop to c3, the queen has to move, but we can see that the knight now is blocking g7. So I can double the pawns, but I won't be up a pawn. I will still be down a pawn, but I'll have double pawns in return. But this leaves black with another problem. Black is running out of places to retreat the queen. So we can see a huge jaw forming, and if the queen retreats, we can simply close the formation and trap the queen. There are two escape possibilities for black's queen. That's either queen takes on the pawn on c5, which will be played eventually, or the queen can retreat to c7. So queen takes on pawn will be discussed later. It will eventually be played. If queen escapes to c7, white can continue with queen to d6, again chasing the queen. If queen takes queen, pawn takes queen, the knight cannot move. Black castles, take. We can see that white is left with a passed pawn. Black's king is exposed, and white has double pawns, and this will lead to a winning middle game for white. So white should probably continue his development with knight to f4, bringing the knight into attack. Perhaps rook to d1, trying to push the pawn. looks bad for black. This wasn't played. Queen didn't retreat to c7. Queen h5 was played. So now we simply close the jaws, and we start by playing h4 to restrict movement of black's queen. Now, if black castles, so just pointing out that castling isn't possible. If black castles, we can continue with g4 to attack the queen, and if queen takes c5, bishop b4 will win either queen or rook. That's just to show that castling isn't possible. If queen takes pawn at this point to escape the trap, we can continue with rook to c1. This was played. Queen takes pawn. And bishop takes knight on f6. And the bishop cannot be recaptured because of rook takes bishop check, winning an additional rook. So black castles. I need to retreat the bishop. But first I play the in-between move, rook to a1. Black now plays queen to c5. This looks like an odd move because I can simply play bishop to d4, gaining a pawn. But other moves are worse, because if queen b4 check, I can play bishop to c3, queen e7, queen to d4, threatening mates, and still threatening to gain the pawn. And if pawn to f6 to block the mate, I can get bishop to b4, winning either queen or rook. So that's the worst continuation. If queen e3 instead, I can play bishop to d4, chasing the queen to h6. Only move that makes sense. Queen h6, same problem. Black will lose the pawn on a7, and his queen is in a worse position. So queen to c5 was played, bishop to d4. So black is up 2 pawns for a piece, but he will lose an additional pawn, and he will be down 1 pawn for a piece. Queen retreats to e7, so I take on the pawn, rook recaptures, and bishop takes rook. Knight to c6. Bishop retreats to e3, h6, preventing all tactics with either pawn or bishop to g5. And king to f2, getting the king into safety. Rook to d8, attacking the queen. Queen to a1, creating threats on g7. e5 to block the threats. This also prevents the development of the knight. So I develop the knight to another square, knight to c3, looking for a knight to d5. Black plays bishop to e6, preventing knights to d5. So I develop differently. Knight goes to b5. And the knight is safe because it's protected by the bishop. Rook to c8, bishop to e2. So now I'm having the choice to develop the rook to the open d file, or creating some sort of rook lift in some cases, which is not yet possible because of the bishop at this point. Rook to d8 to prevent white from developing to d1. g4, so I'm creating a pawn storm. Rook to c8, so we're seeing black not finding any good moves to play. g5, trying to crack open the pawns that are shielding black's king. So pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, and my rook is now in an open file. Rook to d8 again, and queen to g1. And this simple move allows queen to g2 and mate. Black plays queen to b4, queen to h2. Now the king has to run. King to f8, queen check, king e7. I'm getting a free pawn on g7. King d7, so we're flushing out the enemy king. g6. Black cannot recapture with the pawn because of the pin of the queen. I'm threatening pawn takes pawn, and perhaps even promotion. Queen to e7, so black is forced into the defense and brings back the queen. Rook to h7, trying to force pawn takes pawn. b6, pawn takes pawn, and rook to f8 to block the pawn. Now I decide to trade off pieces with queen to g5. So either my queen takes his queen, or his queen will take my queen, and I will recapture with the bishop. The only other option is queen to b4, which is losing for black, because then black has too few pieces into the defense. And after queen to g8, white is winning, because if rook takes pawn, rook takes rook check, bishop takes, queen takes check, white is up two minor pieces, and black is also in a forced mate, so that doesn't work. After queen b4 and queen g8, perhaps black can try bishop takes pawn, but this will lead to rook takes bishop check, rook takes rook, queen takes check, again with a forced mate for white. If black plays a random move like knight to b8, white can simply bring in the bishop and promote after getting rid of the rook. Finally, if rook takes queen, we get pawn takes rook, queen, promotion and check, and black is lost. So after queen to g5, black cannot afford to retreat to queen. Again, probably there are more aggressive continuations, but this is the most secure one. There are two options. Rook takes pawn, exchanging and winning a pawn. Then queen takes queen check, rook takes rook check, king or knight takes, and black will recapture his lost pawn and have a winning endgame. This wasn't played. Queen takes queen was played, so black exchanges the queens. So bishop recaptures. Again, I'm losing a pawn. Rook takes pawn, rook takes rook, bishop takes. But after moving the bishop back to e3, I still get an attack on b6, and there's no way for black to step up with the king in order to protect it. So I can get my pawn back and have a winning endgame. Black plays knight to a5 instead. I get back my pawn. Knight to c4. So we trade off the remaining minor pieces. Now, keep in mind that I have a bishop on the black colored squares, which means I can use it to attack the pawn on the black colored square, and white cannot defend it because his bishop is on the light colored squares, which means black will lose his final pawn and he cannot stop it. Knight to c3, bishop to f7, knight to d1, trying to redevelop in order to attack the pawn. King c6, bishop a5, bringing the bishop into safety. Bishop c4, knight d3. Bishop b3, knight g4, king b5, bishop to c3, black's pawn is lost. King a4, I take on the last pawn, and now there's nothing that black can do to stop promotion. Ultimately, black will have to sacrifice his final piece for one of the pawns, and I can promote the other pawn. Bishop f7, king e3, bishop h5, knight to f6, bishop f7, bishop d6, so I'm trying to clear the way to advance my pawns. King b5, king d4, king c6, pawn to e5, bishop to g6, pawn f4, bishop f5, blocking the advance, knight to h5, which will kick the bishop off of f5. Bishop retreats by itself, trying to cover the advance, but knight to g7 allows the advance. Bishop b1, f5, bishop c2, f6, bishop b3, knight to f7, king d7, knight h6, king e8 to block the advance, and king to e4. Now, this advance is currently covered by the bishop, but the bishop cannot prevent either the e6 pawn advance or simply the king stepping up and advancing the f7 pawn. Bishop c2, bishop b3, king d7, preventing the advance, but this allows f7, so f7 is played. And finally, this is the last chance for the white colored bishop to take on the pawn on f7 to prevent promotion. So bishop takes pawn and knight takes. King e6, check, king d7, so now I'm abandoning the knight with king to f6, and after king takes knight, I play f7, and nothing can stop promotion. So I sacrifice the final bishop. Doesn't have to be done, but clears up the field a bit. Finally, the king is boxed into a corner. and queen b2 checkmate. So I hope you enjoyed the annotation of this game against the Gosu engine. Thanks for watching. Please leave a comment and have a great evening.